This woman was shocked when she found out what her new ring meant. This is one of those stories where it's hard to understand why the main character acted the way they did. If you've never heard of this before, it's basically a story where a woman finds an engagement ring from the 1950s and the secret it held. So let's get right into the story. One day, though, while she was cleaning out her grandmother's closet, she found a small wooden box. What she found out was that Don Luca was a capo mandamento in the Sicilian Mafia during the 1950s. He also discovered that her grandfather's name wasn't actually Giovanni Battista D'Angelo, but rather Lucio Angelico. Well, it turns out that Alice's grandmother didn't actually know much about Don Luca's past either. She only knew that he was a businessman. It turns out that Alice's grandmother had left her some money in her will. And as soon as Alice read the will, she understood why her grandmother had kept all of those secrets. It turns out that her grandmother had set up a trust fund for her and her siblings, and the trust fund was funded by none other than Don Luca himself. He had put aside a large sum of money for each of his grandchildren, and he had done this without telling anyone. So in a way, Don Luca had retired from the Mafia, but he still had his wealth. He knew that his past would always be a liability, so he took steps to ensure that his family would be taken care of no matter what happened to him. But she did know that he had made some powerful enemies over the years, was a kind and gentle man, even though he had once been a feared Mafia boss. Would you have honored your grandfather's wishes and kept his past a secret, or would you have told the police who he really was? Let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to stay tuned because there are lots of interesting stories coming up. At the end of the day, Alice decided to honor her grandfather's wishes and keep his past a secret. She didn't want to bring any bad attention to her or her family. Instead, she decided to use the money from the trust fund to start her own business. She always knew that she didn't want to work for anyone else, and this gave her the opportunity to pursue her dreams. And she was afraid that if anyone found out who he really was, he would become a target. That's why she hid the ring in the first place. She didn't want anyone knowing that her husband was a former Mafia boss. Apparently, her grandfather had changed his name when he immigrated to America. When Alice asked the librarian to print out a picture of Don Luca, she noticed something strange. It was the same man in the photo from the album. The photo in the album was clearly newer than the one on the internet. It looked like it was taken in color, while the one online was clearly black and white. How could this be possible? And inside the box were some old letters. The letters were written in Italian, so Alice took them home to translate. The letters were addressed to Alice's grandmother. He had chosen a small town in upstate New York to live out the remainder of his days. He lived there under the alias Giovanni Battista D'Angelo, and he started a new life as an olive oil importer. But something that doesn't make sense here is why would he need to go into hiding? The Mafia isn't exactly known for being super peaceful. They're known for their extreme violence. So why would someone in the Mafia suddenly decide to go into hiding? Well, it turns out that Don Luca was planning to leave the Mafia behind. He wanted to make an honest living for the rest of his life. But unfortunately, when he tried to retire, the Mafia wouldn't let him. They saw him as a valuable asset, and they weren't going to allow him to walk away. So that's why he went into hiding. But eventually the heat died down, and he was able to live out the rest of his life without any problems. And they were full of love and longing. They also mentioned a family business, and was signed off with the name Don Luca. After the translation was complete, Alice went back to the closet to search some more. And she found a photo album. In the album, she found a picture of a man who looked strikingly similar to her grandfather. His name was Don Luca, and he was standing next to men that looked like they were bodyguards. They were all standing outside of a fancy car. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to look at the story Mafia. Her ring held a family secret. Our protagonist today is named Alice. She had just moved into her grandmother's house after her grandmother passed away. It was an old house, and it came with a lot of old things in it. But there was one thing that caught Alice's eye in particular. It was a ring. It was an ornate gold band. In the center was a giant emerald-cut diamond. It was absolutely huge. The ring looked antique. Alice estimated that it had to be at least 80 years old. And it brought up a lot of questions for Alice. Questions like, how did her grandmother get such an expensive ring? Where did it come from? And what happened to her grandfather? See, Alice's parents had told her almost nothing about her grandparents. They had been very young when their mother died. And by the time their father remarried, Alice's parents had already grown distant from him, so they didn't know much about him either. All they knew was his name, Giovanni Battista D'Angelo. Alice tried searching online to find out more about the ring, or maybe even her grandfather, but she couldn't find anything. At this point, Alice was very curious. She decided to go to the local library and see if they could help her trace her roots back to Italy. It turns out that Don Luca had gone into hiding sometime during the late 1950s. But another question that comes up is, why would Alice's grandmother keep secrets about her grandfather's past? Now, what does Alice do with this information? Does she tell the police who her grandfather really was? Well, not exactly. When Alice read the will, she realized that her grandmother had loved her grandfather very much, and she knew that he would never hurt a fly. Now, if you were Alice, what would you have done?